There's a sweet, sweet spirit in this place. And I know that it's the Spirit of the Lord. There are places you can walk into and you can feel love and joy on your skin. This is one of those places. In a world that's so full of turmoil and stress, this place, this church, is a place where there is the sweet, sweet Spirit of the Lord. Sometimes you need people from outside to come inside to remind you of that, and to tell you that what you think you see and what you think you experience is for real. Prestoncrest Church has a great reputation. I've watched you and known of you through the years, and I have this weekend being here at the Telling the Story conference. I feel like I have just been washed over with joy. It's been a family reunion for me. I've bumped into people I've known from so many places, and then there are people that I bump into that I've never met before, and I feel like I've known them my whole life. And it's been that kind of a weekend for me, so I go away from this place very blessed. Burkeen and Faulkner, who did the marriage enrichment seminar for years and years. I suspect there probably was one held here at some point in time maybe. But when they were going around the world and they were doing their seminar, one of the things that those two couples did every year was that they would get away and they would go to somebody else's seminar. And they said that sometimes it was great and they learned stuff. And sometimes it was awful and they felt good about themselves. But wherever they went, he said, whatever it was that year, it was a great thing in their lives. Because if nothing else, they had taken the time to devote an entire weekend to thinking about their marriage. What you have just done as a church in the Telling the Story workshop this weekend is very much that same sort of thing. We want to reach out. We believe in reaching out. We have something too good to keep to ourselves. And one of the things that maybe it would be good for all churches to do every year is to go away and spend a weekend thinking about just this thing and about how we want to do this better. When I was in the classroom teaching regularly to undergraduates in a course that some members of this church, including Jacob, took, I taught the book of Acts to college sophomores. And I had kind of a strange way to begin that class, but I was at a theater with my wife once, and we were watching a Tyler Perry movie, Medea's Family Reunion. Everybody that's laughing knows the movie I'm talking about. And in that movie, there was a certain point where I leaned over to my wife and I said, "This goes in my Acts class." And I know that, like most of our marriage, she was probably thinking, "What are you talking about?" It was toward the end of the movie. And this large family that's been on a great big farm in the Georgia area. And they had spent the weekend together, and there was all kinds of family drama and dysfunction and everything going on. But toward the end of the movie, there's a moment where old Aunt Ruby, who is in her 90s, comes into the kitchen where all of the older women of the family are sitting around snapping beans, and they're talking, they're just having a good time. But old Aunt Ruby comes in, and Aunt Ruby says, "I want to be with the family." And the music starts, and all the women stand up. And they walk out of the house and they go down the lane and they head toward this cabin. And as they walk down toward that, they encounter pieces of their family and what's going on, and they see just the problems that are there and the anger and the fighting and just there are things that just break their hearts. But they get up to the cabin and somebody rings the bell and the family gathers around, and these two women, Cicely Tyson and Maya Angelou, play the roles. These two women stand on the porch of that of that cabin, and they deliver a magnificent message. And it's basically this. There's a little boy there, and he said, "What's she talking about?" And this Cicely Tyson steps forward and says, "I'll tell you what she's talking about." And then she tells the story of the first couple, the ones that all the rest of the family come from, and about how that they once were slaves, and that they ended up buying the farm from the widow of the slave owner, and that all this family had come from them, and the way that they worked so hard, and the way that their love and their commitment was responsible for all of this family that was there. And then they say, "This is the stock that you came from. This is the blood that flows through your veins." And that's when I leaned to my wife and I said, "This goes in my Acts class." Because when I teach the book of Acts to college sophomores, I want them to know this is more than just ancient history. This is our heritage. These are our people. This is the stock we come from. This is the blood that runs through our veins. In Acts chapter 4 and beginning in verse 17, Peter and John have been taken before the Sanhedrin because of the stir that they've created because of the gospel of Jesus. In verse 17, in order that it may spread no further among the people, the Sanhedrin says, "Let us warn them to speak no more to anyone in his name." So they call them and they charge them not to speak or to teach at all in the name of Jesus. Let me read that again. They called them and charged them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered them, "Whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God, you must judge. But we cannot but speak of what we have seen and heard." That's the stock we come from. That's the blood that runs through our veins. Few chapters later in Acts chapter 8, after Stephen, a great preacher, has been stoned to death and the heart of the church has been broken, and some people are wringing their hands and they're wondering what's going to become of us, we find that Saul approved of this execution, and there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem. And they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria except the apostles. Devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. Paul was ravaging the church and entering house after house. And he dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. I love to tell my students often, and it comes up repeatedly in the book of Acts, I would say, there is going to come a day where you're going to be somewhere, probably in a church somewhere, and something really, really bad is going to happen. There's going to be a major moral failure, or there's going to be a persecution of some kind. And I said, and there is never a shortage of people who are willing to wring their hands and say, "Oh, this is terrible. It's never been this bad. The world's coming to an end." And I said, but on that day, my prayer is that you stand up and you say, "Let me tell you about our people. Let me tell you about the stock we come from. Let me tell you about the blood that runs through our veins." When we face challenges, it's not the end of the church. It's probably opening the doors for new and spectacular growth. The very next verse here says, "Now those who were scattered," remember, the church is being persecuted. Stephen has been stoned to death. Saul is ravaging the church like a wild dog. "Now those who were scattered went about preaching the word." Those are our people. That's our heritage. That is our mission. So as we talk about telling the story, one of the things today that I think we all realize when we talk about sharing the gospel is that it's very easy for a preacher to stand up here and make all of us feel awful about ourselves. I could spend the next 15 minutes ruining your Sunday. and you could go home with indigestion and feeling guilty and burdened and no better for it all. But maybe we can do better than that. Maybe the idea is captured in this theme of telling the story. Maybe there's something, let's go with this a different way today. And let's see if maybe the key to this is not found at the feet of Jesus. You see, I believe that we love the Lord. And I believe we love other people. And I believe we love the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I believe that we want to share this message. And I believe we're frustrated in knowing how we can better do it. Let's spend a little time this morning at the feet of Jesus. If we can go to that next slide. Let's start with Jairus. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and may live." I began to notice that the feet of Jesus are fascinating. And it's a place that so many people in the Gospels find themselves. And Jairus here, who is a respected person, but he has a sick daughter. And every parent in here knows that nothing makes us more vulnerable in all the world than our children. And our hearts go with them. And if they're sick, we're sick. And if they're struggling or if they're in danger, we're in danger. And Jairus comes, and what can you... A sophisticated, respected man, but where does he find himself? He finds himself falling at the feet of Jesus. Now hold on to that. Hold on to it, and for a lot of us, identify with that. Because when our children have a problem, have a health problem, have a social problem, whatever their problem may be, it breaks our heart, doesn't it? Then, secondly, going to the Syrophoenician mother, someone who is so different, someone who's a Gentile, someone who is not of the tribe of Israel. And she's just like Jairus because she's a parent who has a child in trouble. And the text says that immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. There it is again. Where does she find herself? She finds herself at the feet of Jesus. And she falls down at the feet of Jesus. Now, the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. At the feet of Jesus as a broken-hearted parent. As Jacob mentioned, we spent about 1.5 years in Kenya back in our 20s. And one day, we were sick and at home and not able to go out and be with the village church that we were supposed to be with that Sunday, and long before cell phones. And so they didn't know what was wrong with us. And when they gathered at their meeting under the mango tree, they said, "Tomorrow we need to send somebody to go check on the McLartys and see what's wrong and if they have a problem that we can help with." Well, Serafino Gatonga, who was a good friend and someone that we had pitched a tent next to his hut and lived there for a couple of years when we first got in the area. And Serafino walked for about 10 miles. And then he got on the back of a truck and rode about another 10 miles, and he came to our house, and he found out that we'd been ill, and we were doing better, but we hadn't been able to be at church the day before. We sit there, and Ann brings out what was classic Kenyan hospitality, which is buttered bread and chai tea. And so she brings that out for Serafino and me, and we have a conversation on the porch. And we talk about all kinds of things. And we were in the middle of a drought right then, and I said to Serafino, I said, "Did the church pray for rain yesterday?" And he said, "Oh, yes, we must pray for rain." And I said, "Well, we prayed for rain as well, and we'll continue to do so." And then Serafino did the strangest thing. He didn't look at me, but he looked straight ahead, and it was like an Old Testament prophet was sitting in front of me. And he said, a rich man cannot pray for rain. If the rains do not come, he can still feed his children. Whoa. And I knew he was right. And I felt it. And I knew that I had enough money in my wallet. I was a missionary. I wasn't rich, but I had enough money in my wallet. My kids were not going to go hungry. But he knew that as someone who was living from meal to meal, if those rains did not come, there were going to be a lot of parents who weren't going to be able to feed their children. A rich man cannot pray for rain. When people fall at the feet of Jesus, they do so because they're desperate, because they have nowhere else to turn. They come to Him and they see someone that gives them hope and someone who provides compassion. And they come and they fall down at His feet. And Jairus and the Syrophoenician woman, they are just desperate. They have nowhere to go. And their child is in trouble. The next one on my list is the sinful woman. Again, the feet of Jesus. A woman in the city who was a sinner. Jesus had been invited to a dinner, brought an alabaster flask of ointment, and standing behind at His feet, weeping, she began to wet His feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair and kissed His feet and anointed them with ointment. Once again, here's someone who comes to Jesus and she's has nowhere else to go. She's in desperation. And she comes and she senses that this is where there's hope. And this is where there's love. And I don't have the answers. And I don't even know what to ask for. Have you ever been at the point where you didn't even know what to pray for? And have you taken that to God and said, God, I don't even know what to ask for right now, but this is a mess. And I need your help. She's in a situation like that with her life. She's known in the community as the sinful woman. That tells you a lot about the brokenness of her life. But where does she find herself? She finds herself at the feet of Jesus. Are we starting to get the idea that this is a good place to be? Are we starting to sense that a lot of people have traveled this road, and that's where they've been? They've been at the feet of Jesus. Or the man that we know as Legion, because he had so many demons that lived within him. And he was someone who was shackled often and put in chains, and there were guards to guard him, but no one was strong enough to hold him. And he broke the chains, and the demons would drive him out into the desert. And when Jesus arrives there in the land of the Gerasenes, this madman, this crazy man, this monster of a man, who is possessed by this legion of demons, the text says that he cried out and he fell down before him. And he had no way of knowing, those feet have been well used already. There have been a lot of other people crying out with all kinds of needs who have come to those feet, and they have found mercy and they have found healing. And he said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." And when the herdsmen, after Jesus cast the demons out, the people run, you see all the pigs that run into the sea, and they go back to the town, and the people from the town come out. And when the herdsmen saw what had happened, they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone, sitting. Notice, you know where it's going to be. Even before you read it on the screen, you know what it's going to say. And the man is sitting at the feet of Jesus. The blessed feet of Jesus. The man was in desperation, falling before His feet, and now he's sitting at the feet. And as scary as he was before, he's more terrifying now. Because the power that once tormented his life and drove him into the tombs, that power now has made this man, he's got clothes on. And he's sitting. And he's talking. And things are together. What kind of power are we in the presence of? Or the leper, as we go on with the feet of Jesus. One of the lepers, the 10 lepers that Jesus healed. When he saw that he was healed, he turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his feet. Where is it, church? at Jesus' feet. He falls on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. There's another statement just about sufferers in general, that great crowds came to Jesus, bringing with them the lame and the blind and the crippled and the mute and many others, and they put them at his feet, and he healed them, and they glorified the God of Israel. And then maybe the most powerful of all, no, not maybe, I shouldn't say that, the most powerful text of all of these is the one on resurrection morning, when Mary Magdalene and the other Mary come to the tomb, and as they depart quickly, they've been told that Jesus is not here, he's risen from the dead, and as they depart quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and they ran to his disciples, and behold, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And when they saw the resurrected Lord, they came up and took hold of his feet, and they worshiped him. The whole weekend's been devoted to the idea of telling the story. A question for us is, what is our story from our time spent at the feet of Jesus? Everyone who's cried out to God in great need, which means every one of us, everyone who has wept before the Lord, everyone who has said, "Lord, I'm desperate," everyone who said, "Lord, I can't fix this on my own," everyone who has said, "Lord, I'm broken," everyone who has said, "Lord, I can't deal with my own sin problem," everyone who has done that has come to the feet of Jesus. And a great starting place for us as a church in talking about how do we tell the story and how do we share it out of the community. First of all, maybe the great question is, what is our story of our time spent at the feet of Jesus? Ian McLarty is one of my favorite writers in the field of preaching, a Scottish preacher from the late 19th, early 20th century. He wrote a book called Beside the Bonnie Briar Bush that was published in 1894. It was the #1 bestseller in the United States the next year in 1895. It's written in Scottish brogue, and even as I was getting ready for this sermon, I thought, it's such an incredible waste to have a name, a great Scottish name like Bruce McLarty, and not have a Scottish accent. I just so wish I had that. If I had a Scottish accent, I could read the ingredients of bologna, and you would hang on my every word. That's just such a tragedy. So I don't have a Scottish accent to say this, but in that bestseller book, he tells the story of a young man who goes off to train as a minister. And he learns lots of things, reads a lot of books, and he comes back and he prepares a sermon to preach for the village church. And his aunt, who is the one he's staying with, happens to be in his room and cleaning up things, and she sees his sermon lying there on the desk. And she begins to read it. And it's just going to go all the way over the head of everybody who's going to be there. People are going to walk out of church and say, "Man, he's brilliant." But they're not going to have met the Lord. And so she has this very touching conversation with him, and it moves him to change his sermon. And she makes the statement, "You'll say what's right, no doubt about that, and a body will be pleased with you. But oh, laddie, be sure you say a good word for Jesus Christ." People who have been at the feet of Jesus, which is us, as we go into this world, as we go into school, as we go about our daily walk, be sure to say a good word for Jesus Christ. Be sure to say about, "I've been at his feet, and here's what I found. I was broken, I was undone, I was desperate, and he is faithful." In its essence, evangelism is sharing a God-touched piece of one's own soul, sharing our own experience from being at the feet of Jesus. The story is not about me, But the story is about when I came to the feet of Jesus. And I believe there are a million different ways for us to share that with people as we go about our way. And I think people want to know that He is real and that He is alive and that He is faithful and that He will love them as He has loved us. As we sing the song of invitation today, I'd like to use the song, I Love to Tell the Story. One of the great blessings and mentors in my life was Bill McIntyre. He was a preacher that just had a gift for being able to sort of hug a whole congregation. And every time in my growing up, every time that my home church would have some special thing going on, we would call Bill McIntyre to come and bless us in some way. At his funeral, when I arrived to be at his funeral, I noticed that on the program, the title of the theme of the funeral was, I Love to Tell the Story. And I pray someday when my days are gone, I pray that'll be the theme of my funeral someday. I pray that'll be the reputation of this church. I pray that all of us will live our lives with a spirit of, I love to tell the story. And in just a moment as we sing this song, I hope we will sing this as a confession. And we will sing this as a commitment. And we will sing it as something that I want this to be who I am and what I do. And if you have not become a child of God, what we ask you to do today is simply meet us at the foot of the cross. Meet us at the feet of Jesus at the foot of the cross.